Hey everyone, I am Simuzache Kalua. Welcome to a full stack tutorial on how to build a web application using Blazor for both the front end and the back end. So Blazor uses C# to build interactive web apps. And we're going to use HTML, CSS, and C#. There will be no JavaScript in this application. And we'll be able to build a complete application. Now, for the front end, we're going to use what we call MudBlazor. It's a component library that helps you to kickstart to build your components, and it will help us beautify our application. We're going to use SQL Server as our database, and for us to talk to that, we're going to use Entity Framework call that will enable us to talk to that database. And for the application that we're going to build, it's going to be a supplier portal. So it's a basic cloud application. So what this application will be able to do is it is going to fetch all the suppliers. You'll be able to get a supplier and you'll be able to edit. And once you edit, it should give you prompts. You should be able to delete a supplier. And finally, you should be able to create a supplier. Alright, so join me on this journey as we build this application from scratch, line by line. So before we use MudBlazor, there are many ways you could use it. I want us to go to get started so that we see what they recommend. So this shows you the installation. So for you to use the MudBlazor template, you're going to, it says here to get started quickly, you can use the templates, and these are pre-configured. So open the terminal and you're going to run that command, and once you run that command, it will install MudBlazor template in your machine. So I've done that already, and if you've done that, let's proceed to go to Visual Studio. And once you get there, you're going to create a new project, and you should have the MudBlazor template over there. MudBlazor team, of course I have it because I was using it earlier, but you could always search here at the templates and you should find it. The main templates, if you search for MudBlazor, it should be there. From experience, these new ones, they usually come to the end, so you might want to go there and check. Alright, so I'm going to select that and I'm going to click next. Of suppliers, the information, and add them or edit them when necessary. So I'm going to click next. App. So I want you to set the Wasm hosted, which give you the same. Select that and just go create. Alright, so our app is built. One thing that you should do before everything is change this from client to server. I've seen people fall into the error whereby it doesn't pull from the API. So let's run this and see what it gives us out of the box. So I'm going to press Ctrl F5. And there we are, it loads. It gives us a hello world. I think this is by Blazor. Pretty much whatever Blazor gives us. But I think this is nicer. So we've got MudBlazor over there. We've got their link to their website. We've got their GitHub there. We've got our home. We've got our counter. Click me. If I click, that goes up by 1. And we've got fetch data. And there we get it. Now, as you can see here, there's no need for you to be skilled at front end, to create a good looking interface. And this is what you see, and that's what Blazor tries to do. And then we're going to use the same concept and build our portal using the same approach so that we can build something that's really appealing and also does the job. So let's proceed to Visual Studio and just go through a few things. Again, there are 3 projects that come here. You've got the shared, the server, the client. Now, the server is just the business logic. So this is your backend. This is where you talk to your database. This is where you do your data manipulation. This is where you're going to get the request to change your data. The client is, this is where what you see, the front end. For instance, when we're playing around with it, we saw the front end and we're able to click. So all of those will be tied to the front end. That will be done by the client. And the shared there, these are concerns that concern both the front end and the back end. You know, for instance, there might be a model in our case with suppliers. So supplier is a model. We expect our back end to have a supplier. Also, we expect our front end to view a supplier. So that is a cross-cutting concern between the two applications. So instead of putting it in one, we put it into another library, which will now enable us to access it in two places at once instead of having it in both places. All right. In this case, if the supplier changes, we change one place, it reflects into both. So it's some sort of a good architecture, I would say, that really helps us to really manage things in terms of maintainability and in those types of scenarios. Now, as we've mentioned, we're trying to build a supplier portal. So the first thing that you would do is to have a supplier. So let's go to the shared, because this will be a concern that's done by both. Now, by default, you have the weather forecast. We're going to leave it just as it is. All right, it's just a class that comes with C#, Microsoft, as they're building this. It's a POCO. It just allows us to start somewhere. Now I want you to go to the shared, and we're going to create a folder. We're going to call that folder models. So go to add, new folder, call it models. Okay. And within the models, we're going to create a class. We're going to call that class, you guessed it, supplier. So let's call it supplier. All right, make it public. Okay, so a supplier should have an ID. And let's make sure it's a GUID. So a supplier has an ID. A supplier has a name. So a supplier will have a name. Let's just default that to string.empty. All right. A supplier has obviously a company that they're supplying us from, so we know what company that was. So string.empty, and would also be interested in the email, right? Email, okay. String.empty. So there we go. We have our supplier, and this supplier is in the shared project because it's a cross-cutting concern. It will be needed both in the client as well as in the server. Now, for us to be able to add supplier, delete, edit, and whatnot, we are going to need to have a way to do that. So in this case, we're going to use a database. We're going to use a database to keep track of all of that. But for you to use a database, where is that concern? So that concern cannot be in the front end, because the client, its duty is just to show you. The server is the one that has the business logic. So you expect to have in the server application your database connection. Now our preferred flavor of our database is going to be Entity Framework Core. Now Entity Framework Core is what we're going to use to talk to our database, right? So let us go ahead and install the packages we need for Entity Framework. So let's click on that and click Manage Nuget Packages. And once we do that, we're going to install the packages that Entity Framework understands and Entity Framework needs in order to talk to a database. All right. So we're going to install the Entity Framework core itself. It's 6.0.10. That's the latest. I think yesterday it was at 0.9. So accept that. So we'll install the Entity Framework core. We're going to install the entity framework design. Accept. We're going to install the entity framework SQL Server because that's the provider we want to use. If you want to use Postgres, SQLite, you also install that provider. And that's Microsoft telling you you're free to use whatever database works for you. You're not just tied to SQL Server. And then tools. This will help us with our migrations. So these 4 packages will now give you access for you to go out of your way and talk to a database. Now, Entity Framework has a way through which it enables you to go out there and talk to a database. You need to have what we call a data context. So a data context is a window through which you talk to get to Entity Framework, and it in turn it talks to the database. So in the server, I'm going to close the shared. In the server, create a folder and call that folder data. And within that, create another folder. I want you to call it context. So this will be a window to your database. All right, context, all right. And within that context, I want you to create a class, and that class will be called a supplier DB context. This will give us the access to our SQL Server database. So let's call this supplier DB context, right? So this is the one that will give us access. Now for us to use Entity Framework, then there has to be a way we're going to link our class, the supplier DB context, to Entity Framework. And to do that, then we're going to inherit DB context, which is part of the Entity Framework. It's part of the Entity Framework core. And you'll see it'll tell you that there is no reference. Control dot should enable you to add that reference. You see using .core. And once you add that, you'll see that it brings the using there. So it means by using DB context there, we're saying this class now has access to everything Entity Framework core has. So this class will be our window to the database because now it's a child of that DB context. Now what do you need for you to use? So whenever you use the DB context, you're going to need to have a constructor that takes in the DB context as well as the DB context options. So you'll see that okay, it's like rush to do that for me. So you need a constructor of the same, and that constructor takes in the DB context options, which takes in the constructor name or the context name, and we're going to give the options to the base as well. You will see this once we come to the registration. So at this juncture, just by doing this class is ready to talk to a database. But before we do that, I want us just to have some data so that as we build our application, our database is going to have some data that's seeded. So to do that, there is a function we override. Now for those who don't know what override is, it means if you don't call that function, it has a normal way through which it does things. But when you override it, you are adding functionality to it. So let me show you what I mean by that. So override, it's called on model creating. So this, as you're creating your model, your database, it's run. But if there's things you want to do as it's running, you call it, you override it. Okay. So in this case, I'm saying what I want to do is I want to add data as you're creating the model itself. I want you to add this data there. All right. So I'm going to use this, the model builder. Excuse me. So I'll say model builder. Okay. Dot. Before I go there, before I start overriding, the question is we need to tell it what tables we have. So in our case, the table we want to use is the table in the shared, which is called supplier, right? So you give it here. My apologies, I was getting ahead of myself. So it's going to be a DB set of supplier. DB set of supplier. And let's bring supplier in from the shared. and let's call the table suppliers, right? So when you put this here, when it's creating the model, it will create a table called suppliers. It will go to the suppliers table, the suppliers class, and get the thing it needs to build. Now here we're saying we want to override this method. As you're creating suppliers, there is something we want you to do to those models, and this could be so many tables. It's possible because this is just an illustration. We're just using one, but this could be a lot of tables. But as you're creating the model, we want you to do something for us. So we want you to get the entity. So model builder.entity. And how come it's not working? It's the small one. So model builder.entity. What entity do you want to play around with? I want to play around with the suppliers entity, right? Dot has data, all right? So we're saying we want to give it data. Now in our case, it's supplier data. So what you would do is you're going to create a new supplier, all right? And you're going to create a new supplier like so. So the ID, remember our ID is a GUID. So we want the system to generate the GUID itself, all right? So it will be a GUID. The name of supplier should be XYZ, for instance. And the supplier has the company. The company is Get Tech Limited. Could be Get Tech Limited, for instance. And the email is going to be gettechgt@gt.com, right? And we can just add another company, another supplier rather, through that, like so. So I'm just going to copy that, come down, paste that, and close that. And we're still getting an error. I've opened this one here. Okay, I think it needs something like that. Okay, and then this is going to be ABC. Okay, and this will be cleaning services. It's going to be clean. It's going to be clean at clean.com. Clean at clean.com. All right. So we're saying when you're creating this model, I want you to add these two entities. All right. I hope that makes sense by now. So we have created our context, our window to talk to the database. But the question is, how are we going to know where the database resides? So we need to find a way to link our context to our database. All right. Now, this is a thing that might change. You know, on my local machine, it could be in my local machine, but eventually this app will go to a server, could go to AWS, could go to Azure. That connection needs to be dynamic enough so that you can change. I don't have to open Visual Studio to change the application again. So what we're going to do now is go to the app settings of JSON. So this is a place where you have things that can change within an application. You might want to change the host that you allow to few. You might want to change the login level from warning to severe, for instance. So this is a place where you put your local configurations, things that might change. So you could put your JSON web tokens here, although it's not recommended. Now let us proceed to add the thing that will talk to our database. So for instance here, and we're lucky enough that Microsoft did it in a way that it already has a connection string. So this is a string you will use to talk to your database. So we're going to call it supplier connection. So to avoid confusing people, I'm going to use the local SQL Server Express DB, which is within Visual Studio. So first of all, you want the server. Where is this located? So this, you could put your IP address, 172 or wherever it will be located, right? But in my case, I'll put local DB. within my machine, /MSQL Microsoft SQL Server local DB. Right? That's enough to say go to my local and play with that. The other thing would be we need to have the name of the database. So let's call this supplier DB, right? And you need to have something like authentication. In our case, there's something we call trusted connection. If I put trusted connection and set that to true, it will override and it will give me access. Okay, so we're saying under connection string, if somebody wants to get the supplier connection, they will now get where our database will exist. And the database name will be called supplier DB. Now in this case, we're using what we call code first approach, which means the database does not exist as of yet. So what we're going to do now is we are going to create the database from the model, right? On model creating. All right, moving on. Now, .NET Core has what we call the dependency injection container. So this is a place where everything our application depends on is registered. So in this case, our application depends on Entity Framework in order for it to connect the database. So we also have to go out of our way and tell our application that this is what you depend on, this is where it is, and that's where you can get it. So let's go to the program.cs. And you see that in the program.cs as a role, you are building a web app using the web builder. So once you're building it, you're bringing in things that will be necessary. Okay, so you may need controllers, you need views. So we also want to add our database dependency. All right. So we're going to use this builder, and on top of it, we're going to build our service which we depend on. All right. So I'm going to say builder, builder.services. The first argument is add a DB context. And what's our context in this case? Our context is called supplier DB context. So we're saying in our dependency, we want you to add the DB context. All right. And if you remember, the DB context itself takes in an options thing. An option in its constructor. So whenever you call this supplier anywhere, you have to provide that options. So we're going to say options. Okay, let's put an S there. Options. We'll need two options. If I can type options dot use SQL Server. So we want to use SQL Server. If you remember, we added SQL Server as our provider in the Nuget packages, right? So we want to use SQL Server. And here, where are we going to get the SQL Server? So we're going to use a build again. The builder has what we call a configuration that will give us access to things in that app settings.json. And like enough, we've got get connection strings. And once you do that, you're going to go to your app settings and just take your supplier connection and you're going to put it there. All right. So at this juncture, you're done. So you're saying on the builder service, add a context. That's the context, but this context requires an options. In that options, we're using SQL Server, and if you need to know where it exists, then go to the connection string. It'll give you everything you need. So at that juncture, we say we have done what's necessary. Now, our next order of business is how are we going to talk to the database? What operations are we going to do? Now, we can do it straightforward, but to be honest, we need to have structure. So we're going to use what we call the repository pattern. So within the data folder here, I want you to create another folder called repository. So what is the repository pattern? It's just a contract we set, and whoever wants to use it has to abide by its functionality. So let's create an interface. We're going to call it an iSupplier repository, right? So go to choose interface there and call this iSupplier interface. Oh, sorry, iSupplier repository. Right? You're going to add it there. And underneath that, also create a class, call it supplier repository. Right? Like so. So let's go to an interface. An interface just tells you the functionality that will be there. So we want to get a supplier, get all suppliers we have, get a single supplier, add a supplier, delete and update. So we want about 5 functionalities. So the first one would be, we want to get back a list. So I've used asynchronous here. We want to get back a list of supplier. And let's bring that in. And this would be get suppliers, right? That's our first order of business. We want to get suppliers. We want to get suppliers. Then from there, you want to get a single supplier, right? Task get supplier. Since it's doing autocomplete, I don't want to get supplier like that. I want to give it a GUID. Just by the ID, I should be able to get the supplier. You also want to task add supplier, right? You should be able to add a supplier, and you give a supplier and a supplier there. You also want to delete a supplier. You're going to have a GUID. You also want to go out there and update a supplier. So our interface is going to dictate to say that these are the functionalities that whoever wants to use this interface needs to give without fail. All right. So the class we created was supplier repository. If that class inherits from this repository, it will give us an error, and that error will be, it will say supplier does not implement there are 5 errors. So it means if you want to do that, then you have to provide with the functionality. Now if you go there and click control dot, what Visual Studio does is it goes out and it creates for you those 5 functions just to remove that error. But you'll see it doesn't implement anything. It's up to you to implement. Now we said that for you to access a database, your window to that is your database context, your supplier context. So we still need to use this context to get to our database, which means this context is a dependency through which the supplier repository needs. So in dependency injection, what we do is before we create a class, we give it its dependencies. And in this case, we're going to use the constructor. So we're going to call the constructor dependency injection. So what you do now is bring a constructor. So click C2, and you say, whenever you're creating this repository, you have to give it something. And in our case, we want to give it the supplier DB context. All right, call it supplier DB context. Okay. And let's also create a property for it. Control dot, then property over there, and put an underscore over there, and put an underscore over there. For the sake of test, control dot and just add an out check. Okay, so we're saying whoever calls supplier repository has to give us the DB context, right? That's a dependency to put it. Now for us to add a supplier, now we know that we are going to talk to a database, so things might fail. A database might be off, a service in SQL Server on that server might be off, so we just need to do a try catch to avoid our app from crashing. All right, now if you remember, if you go to our shared folder, you see that the supplier has a GUID, but we want our application to create this GUID for us, right? So it means whenever you want to create a supplier, you're going to get the supplier thing that's given there, .id, and tell it to use a GUID dot new GUID. So it will create for you a GUID on the fly. Okay, for you to add a database, all you need is a supplier context, and you need the table called supplier, and tell it to add. So add, and add the supplier. Okay, but if you leave it there, it won't add the supplier. It just be on the window. You need to say supplier context dot save changes. So this is going to go and it's going to add, and don't forget to put async there since it's asynchronous. If this fails, then you can just throw a new exception. All right. Now again, exception is a whole other topic. We can do it if necessary. We're going to do it here just on a minimum. So fail to create, supplier. Sorry about that. Supplier. And then we are going to want to delete a developer. Again, we're going to use a try catch, like so. But for you to delete something, you need to make sure it does exist. So the first order of business is var supplier, get the context, go to the table supplier, and say first or default async. All right. And this is going to help you check. So to check if the ID actually exists. So here you're going to put async. And since this is asynchronous, you can await it over there. So I'm saying go to the suppliers and check the ID if it exists. All right. Now, if it exists, it means it's not equal to null. We're going to say, get me the context. Get me the context. The supply DB context dot suppliers dot remove the supplier. Also, this will not remove it completely, so you have to call the save changes the dot save changes. So you're gonna have dot save changes. Okay, so it could be null or it couldn't exist. So if it doesn't exist, you also need to tell them explicitly that. So we're just gonna throw a new argument null exception. So argument null exception, and just tell them supplier does not exist, like so. All right. And if there's a general exception, just throw a new argument, throw a new exception. Just tell us that you failed to delete supplier. Fair enough. How do you get a single supplier? First of all, you need to do the try catch, right? Very important. And we have a similar code that gets the supplier. Okay, and we could do it there. Don't forget to put the asynchronous over there. And here, you're going to say if the supplier is not equal to null, then just return, give it back, right? Give back the supplier. It means it does exist. Else, then you can throw a new argument null exception and say supplier does not exist, like so. And if it's something generic, throw an exception, throw a new exception and say failed to get supply. All right, perfect. Now get all suppliers. Again, a try catch is necessary there. And once you get here, you're going to say var developer, var suppliers. I don't know why I keep saying developer. Suppliers will be equal to and let's not forget to put an async there. So you're going to await, and then you're going to get the context, supplier context to list async, right? So this will give you in a list and just return that, return suppliers. Now you might ask why I'm not doing for the nulls, because you could have a list that's empty. It's not really an error per se. All right, if there's an error there, just throw a new exception and say, I'm sorry, and say exception and say failed to get suppliers, like so. And the last order of business is to update the developer. And again, we're going to need to have a try catch. Very important if you don't want your app crashing. And don't forget to put async over there. And again, for you to update, it has to exist. So we might also borrow the code we used to get there. Very important. All right, so we do it there. Now the difference is we're giving it the ID. It's a supplier, so the supplier should have an ID within itself. Supplier.id. All right, and there's an error because supplier to edit. All right, now again we're going to check. If it's not equal to null, then it means it does exist. Then we can proceed to edit. So what are we editing? The ID won't be changed. So we can say supplier to edit. We can change the name to supplier name, right? We can also change the supplier to edit dot email. We can change that as well to supplier dot email. We could also change, what else can we change from the model? We can change there's name, email, the company to supplier to company. So those are the 3 things that you can change. All right, and then you're gonna say if the supplier doesn't exist, then throw a new argument null exception, and tell them that supplier does not exist. If there's a general error, then also just throw an exception there and say failed to update supplier, like so. All right, at this juncture our repository is set. It can talk to the database. We're going to proceed to add it to the dependency injection. Now again, our application will also depend on this repository. Now since we've used an interface in the class, it means it has to figure out that if I give it the iSupplier repository, I'm talking about the supplier repository. So that's important for you to resolve. So again, go to the class program.cs class and just underneath this, get the builder and services and add scoped. Okay. If you want to know more about these life cycles, I've got a video. It will be in the description. Add scoped, and you want to use the iSupplier repository and have the supplier repository. Okay, like so. So we're saying whenever you see iSupplier repository, then that means use this class as your implementation. So if you change to another class, you will change here. All right, so the next order of business now is to enable this repository to be exposed to the web. That's the whole concept of an API, because you want people to talk to your database. So go to your controllers, right click on that controller, add a controller. Now make sure that that controller is an API controller, not MVC controller. It will give you views. So API, you could make it, what I usually do is I just read write so that we don't type so much code. All right, so we're going to call this supplier controller, and it's going to create the controller. So at this juncture, this will be a get for getting all. Since we want to use API values, it's RESTful. We want it to adhere to REST. So we're going to use what we call an action result. So an action result just gives us those responses. All right. So we want to return an action result, but we have made our repository to be asynchronous. So it uses, you see the tasks there, right? So it means we need to return a task first, a task, of action result, and it will be an action result of a list, and that will be a list of what? A list of suppliers. So put supplier there, and control dot to bring it in. Okay, and those are 1, 2, 3. Okay. Now, how do you access the repository? Because for us to use the API, the endpoints here need to talk to the repository. So it means we also need to bring the same approach we used of constructed dependency injection. It's going to come in the control as well. So when the constructor there, you're going to say ctor. See, it brings you there. It brings you the constructor, and then you're going to bring the I supplier repository. Okay, and then we're going to call that supplier repository. Okay, control dot and create and assign a field, and then you see something interesting here. We are not calling the supplier repository class. We are calling the I repository, which on its own it's just contracts. So how will the API know where to go get it? That's where we talked about the dependency injection here, saying if it sees I supplier repository, it's going to proceed with the supplier repository, like so. That's very important, right? Then here we're going to write on this supplier repository to play around with those functionalities. So for us to get everything, first of all, we're going to get the repository. It's a repository dot get suppliers, you see, and we can keep the suppliers in a variable suppliers, you see, and then we're going to say, and we're going to have to wait since it's asynchronous. All right. And don't forget to put async there, right? Async, like so. And then we're going to return an OK 200, like that. And we're going to return the suppliers, right? Oh, there you go. Now we want to get a single supplier. And again, we're going to use a task. And that task will return an action result, so that we're able to use things like OK, which are supported by RESTful API. And we want to get, this time around, it's not a list, we're just getting a supplier, and we don't use an integer for our GUID, we use a GUID, like so. And let's close one more thing over there, right? And here we're going to, first of all, we're going to say var supplier is equal to get, so let's put our wait first, get me the context, the repository, and there's get supplier there, and get supplier takes in what? An ID, which is a GUID, so the ID will give it over there, should suffice, right? Now we could get the ID or we could not get the ID, right? It could exist, it could not. So for us, first of all, we'll do an out check. We're going to say if supplier is not equal to now, it means the supplier does exist. Then we are going to return the supplier. If the supplier does not exist, then we can just return a not found or bad request, right? Depending on what you prefer. All right. Then post is to create something. So a post request is something that creates. So the first thing is it's just a task of action result, okay, because our repository doesn't return anything. So a post of action result, right? And what are we posting? We want to post a supplier, right? But that's a problem. If you're to post a supplier here, the user will have to give you a GUID, an ID, which is not the case because we want the system to create its own GUIDs. So for us to create a supplier without bothering the user with an ID, then we have to create another class. We call them DTOs, data transfer objects. And these ones will help us transfer the data. So here, under modules, I want you to create a folder in the shared. The folder should be called DTO. Okay? And DTO, I want you to create a class called supplier create DTO. All right, so create a new class, call it create supplier DTO. All right. You want the user of your API just to focus on what they need. All right. So bring it here. make sure that class is public. All right. I'm going to copy this class to avoid typing again when I go to the controller. So go back to the controller. Instead of you sending us the supplier, send us the create supplier DTO. All right. All right. Now, since our repository, if you go to create, it is expecting a host supplier, then we have to find ways within our application to create the supplier, not to bother the one who's consuming our API. So what we'll do here is we're going to, once that comes, we're going to create. So var supplier to create will be equal to new supplier. You see that? New supplier. And what we'll do there is we're going to say the supplier has a name. The name will be equal to create supplier DTO dot name. And we have company. It's going to be create DTO dot company. Now I could use automapper here to make it simpler, but I want you to understand the concept behind it all. And again, I've got videos on automapper on this channel, so those will also be in the description. And what else do we need? So after email, I think we are sorted, right? What else is remaining? ID. Now the ID won't be there because the ID will be prepared by the system. Okay. So now, instead of us sending this case supplier or repository, we'll send this supplier. And once it gets here, it won't have the ID, but it will create its own ID. So that's very smart. All right. So let's go back there. And after we do this, then we're going to say, await, get me the repository, and call me the add supplier, and give that add supplier the supplier to create. All right. And once you do that, you can just return an OK and say supplier created. And it's throwing me an error. I don't know what the error is. Okay, no, it's not. So at this juncture, you're done. And the other thing we need to do is to put. So put updates, right? Now what I'll do here, instead of doing all of this, I'm just going to have supplier there and call it supplier. All right. So if you do that, then you have to remove this, because when it sees ID, it pushes ID here. You see? So that will not be necessary. You could delete it. For instance, here there was ID. So what it'll do is it will put 5 in the get request. That's why it's still there. But if you don't need it, then you might as well delete it. All right. Again, for us to do this, first of all, we need to have a task of action result. Task of action result. Brilliant. And here you have to await, and let me not forget to put the asyncs there. My apologies. Sometimes you do async. All right. So here we're going to have to await and supply repository that update supply. As simple as that. Then just return an OK. And your OK will be supplier updated. Updated. And at this juncture, you want to delete. So we're going to keep the ID there. We're just going to change it to be a GUID. And it's going to be in asynchronous, and it's a task of an action result, like so. All right. Now for us to delete, we're going to do await about ID, and once that happens, I just return an OK. All right, and you're going to say supplier deleted. Okay. All right. At this juncture, I would say congratulations, you have finished building the backend. Now we're going to proceed to build our front end and make it look pretty with MudBlazor. Okay, now my sincere apologies. Before you go to creating the front end, we need to have a database. We have created everything, but we don't have the database. So let's do that now. Go to Tools, Nuget Package Manager, and then select the Package Manager console. And I'm going to zoom this in so that it's visible. Then type add hyphen migration and call this added supplier table. Sometimes these things happen. Sorry, very sorry. All right. So it will go out and it's going to build your application. It appears we've run into an error. It's saying your client does not match. Now this is an error you might meet. I've let it slide for a reason. What you do here, you see this default project there. Change that and make it server. And once you do that, run the migration again. So the migration has run successfully. Let's see what it's going to do. We've got two methods. We've got the up and obviously the down. The down will drop your table. If you're going to run this command called remove migration, it will do that. Okay, but we tend to go forward. So what is it doing? It's saying model migration builder create table suppliers. Okay. The ID is table, unique identifier over there, that will be your primary key. Then you've got your name, company, and email. You've got your primary key, and it's saying please insert data. And this is the data we had created. And you can see it's also gone out of its way to create its own GUID. The next order of business now is just to run one command, and the command is called update database, and this is going to create the database for you. So we see that it's done. It means the database is created. One way to find out, go to SQL Server Object Explorer. If it's not visible, go to View, then you could set it over there. So click on that, and once the SQL Server comes, pick the first one, the drop down databases, and that was what, supplier DB, and go to tables. You should have two tables, one for the migration, which is right here. There's a folder it created here, and the other one for the suppliers, which we had created. So you will see that once you go there, once you go to the suppliers, you can like click and go to view data. So if you look at it there, those two have been added, and now let's proceed to the front end. There are two things that I've observed that are wrong, or we might have made a mistake, so let's clear them before we proceed. In the API, go to the server, in the repository, under the update, I'm assuming some people had seen it, but under the update, I forgot to add these two lines. Very, very important, otherwise it won't update. So change this. If you're watching it on YouTube, then you can change it, and I'm guessing the repository on GitHub is going to be recent. So make this change and go to the program.cs, and I had put this underneath the build. It's not going to work, it will throw an error. So those are the two things that you should change before we proceed. If you've done that, then we can proceed to the client project. So what do we have here? We've got the MudBlazor. So this just does your routing. If you see this, sorry, an address, it's what it throws when it hasn't found a layout. Then ports. So whatever goes here becomes global to your application. If you put it here, you don't have to reference it in the page you're working on. With Blazor, we have the main layout, and these are things that we saw at the beginning of the video. We saw two top icons there. Here they are, Mud icon. We've seen the nav menu, which is this one, where you're gonna put whatever you want to navigate to, and the counter component. So in Blazor, we have components which we render. So a counter is a component, fetch data is a component, an index is also a component. So we're also going to create components. We want to have a place where we can view our supplier details. We want to add suppliers, we want to edit suppliers, and also we want to delete suppliers. So essentially we want to have three components, and we're going to make them now, and we're going to talk about them in length. But most importantly, I want us to understand MudBlazor, this awesome library that helps you do things easily, that does not require for you to know a lot of CSS and designing. It helps you. It has components and whatnot. So the first thing we're going to do here is we are going to create 3 components. One will be for details, one will be for adding or editing. The last one is going to focus on deleting. So what I'll do here, I can just get the counter there, copy the counter in the pages and just paste it 3 times. So copy it once, copy it twice, copy it 3 times. The first one, call it supplier details. The other one we can call it add supplier. The last one we're going to call it delete supplier. So we've got 3 components under the pages: add supplier, .razor, delete supplier, and supplier details. So I want you to get rid of all the code which will be there in all 3. Go to delete supplier and also remove that. Remove the code as well, and add supplier, do the same as well. Right, so let's have supplier details. Now our plan is simple. We want to have a page where in that page we're going to have a table that shows a list of suppliers, and that table should give us the capability to edit, add, and also initiate delete from there. But for you to have a list of suppliers, then you need to get them, right? Now in our Blazor architecture, we're seeing that we've got the client and the server. So the server is the backend, it's our API. So we need to talk to the API. In other words, the client will make an HTTP request to the backend, right? So that's very important. So we need to use our code to fetch that data. If you're using, let's say, JavaScript as a full stack application or as a full stack development stack, then you have your React application here making a fetch request. Either you're going to use Axios or you're going to use Fetch API to pull that data from that API, and then you render. In this case, C# itself will make that request towards the API, and it will get that and it will do the rendering. So the first thing we need here is we need to have a list of suppliers. Okay, so I'm going to say could be protected list, then supplier. So control dot, because you have to bring that in. So bring that in, and suppliers is equal to new. If you do this, C# knows that this new is identical to that, so there's no need to do that. All right, so we have the list here, right, which will hold whatever comes. It's an empty list. We've just initialized it. So how are we going to get the list? Then we're going to say, now something happens here. When you load a page, it calls a function is called on initialize the sync. All right, in our case we want to get something when the page loads. So what do you do in programming? If you want to add functionality or alter them, then you override that function and you give it the necessary information you want to give it. So we're going to override that, override on initialize, and you see what it says. It says method invoked when the component is ready to start. So when your component, in this case supplier details, is ready to start, this method will be called. All right, so when this method is called, what do you want to do? Simple. We're going to say await. All right, now here you want to make the API call. All right, but for you to make an API call, you need an HTTP request. In our case, we have to inject the HTTP client, which we're not going to use to make that subsequent request. So you're going to go up here and type inject. and type HTTP client. Okay, we're going to call it the same HTTP client, right? Which means here I can use HTTP client dot. Now for us to get all suppliers, that's a GET request. So we're going to say get from JSON async. Get from JSON async, right? But we want, when it comes, for us to serialize it into something that it knows. So give it a list of supplier. Okay. And what this takes for a GET request is it takes the URL. In this case, it's API/supplier. All right. What error are we having? You're supposed to close it twice. All right. All right. Then we can just say suppliers is equal to suppliers is equal to that. So we're saying whatever comes from there, give it here, right? And here we're done. When this component is loaded on initialize async, get us the suppliers. So whenever it's loaded, we have access to that supplier throughout the component. Now we want to use MudBlazor, all right? And if we go to MudBlazor, if you go to get started and we go to docs, you will see that MudBlazor is filled with a lot of great stuff. And in this video, we're going to touch some, but we cannot finish all components. If you just go check its components, you see it has alerts, app bars, avatar. You know, the alert. What the alert does is it just pops up an alert. It has charts. You know, you could make bar charts, and then when you go to show code, it shows you how the charts are done. You know, all you do is, you know, have a list of data, and it will, on its own, just bind that data and make for you charts. It has a lot. You know, if you want to bring in images, how do you bring in images, icons? So it's super loaded. You see all these beautiful icons are there. Message box, it's actually there. You could have a nav menu, which we've seen in the code, and it brings in all these things. So it's really stacked. Typography, all right? Things like heading, and here they are. And we'll see that if we go to the fetch data, which was their API, you will see that there's something called a mud text, right? And when you go to the typography, you see that this is mud text. So mud text, if you use H1, it gives you this. H2, it gives you this. H3, it gives you that. So we want to have a heading called supplier details. So I'm going to copy this mud text. Okay. And keep in mind, if you use the normal HTML text, it will work as well. All right. But we want to use MudBlazor in our case for consistency. So if I go to supplier details and I paste this here, then I can call this supplier details. All right. We can also add what we call a page title, which shows in the tab. All right. Just call this supplier details, like so. All right. So we've started using MudBlazor. But what do we really want? We want to have, in our case, a table. So how do you find a table in MudBlazor? Just search for it. So there's a search button there. Just type table, and it will give you here. There's table, table examples, a simple table. So just go to table and see the examples, and see what it gives us, and see how can we use that to our advantage. So it says there's a default table. So the default table displays data in simple rows, and it's responsive. It breaks into mobile layout on break XX unless changed. You can add data label property to the mud ID cells. All right. So it goes on and on. But show me the code. Now, normally what happens is if you're using the normal Blazor HTML, you have to loop through a list. But if you look at if you're looking at this MudBlazor, there's nothing like looping through the list. So what's interesting here? Let's start with the code. They have a list there. Then on initialized, they're making an API request and they're getting the list. It's called elements. And if you go to the table there, you've got mud table item here. This binds whatever is coming, and in our case, they're binding elements. Then you've got hover, true, breakpoints, and loading. So what we'll do is, let's copy that. Let's see if it does what they promised to do. So we're going to copy that, come here, and paste it over there. All right, let's break it down. Things like breakpoint at SM, okay, you could leave those, but let me remove the loading ones. So what's our item? So item here will be the data we want to bind with. In our case, it's suppliers. So you're gonna go there, remove that with the @ symbol as well, and put their suppliers. Are we together thus far? Then in our case we have, so that's the header content. In our case we have the ID, we have the name, we have company, and we have email. And I'm going to add the fourth one, which I'm going to call action. It'll make sense as we're going. So, and we seem to be getting an error. I don't know what the error is. It is saying, okay, let's just proceed. So we want our header context to have ID, name, company, and action. We want these 4 things. You will notice that MudBlazor comes with this context. If we're using low Blazor, then we would put supplier.number, but it comes with the context. And if you see where it comes from, it says supplier context. So our supplier in this case is a context. So here, this would be our ID as our data label. This would be the name. This would be the company. This would be the email. For the action, no need to tie that, and you'll see why. Okay. Then this would be context.id, right? This would be context.name. Okay. I wonder why my .company, like so, and this would be context.email. And these are positions. We don't want that. We don't want them for now. Okay. And for this, there'll be nothing here for now. Okay. We seem to be getting an error. I don't know why. Context.id. Okay, that's gone. So what have we done here? We're saying we need a table. In this case, it's my table. We want to tie that its items to a model, and in our case, suppliers, which we've created a suppliers list here, and we have given that list its contents. And we're saying hover, just make it true, and the breakpoint small, it should be able to break. And we're saying in our header we want this contents. In our rows we want this context. You see, there's only for a for loop there, a for each loop. Now let's try it out. But for us to get to this page, there is something we need to do. So if we want to get to this page, we need to have a route. If you look at fetch data there, it came with a page there called route. All right. Similar here, we need to have a page. When we get there, we should be able to route. So call this page and call this supplier details. All right. Now I want you to go to the nav menu, go to the shared folder, go to the nav menu, and let's add one. And you're seeing the nav menu there has a menu nav link. So this is also available in the documentation. You know, if you want to dig further. So we want this nav to be called supplier details. So supplier details. Then the icon should not be list. Let's try to find if there's any for people. There is nature people. Let's use an emoji people and see what that does. So we've added a fourth link called supplier details. Now let's click Control F5 and let's see what that will get us. All right, so there we have it, and we have our supplier details here. Let's go click it. Supplier details, and it's giving me fetch data. Let's go back. That's a problem with copy and paste. It's still fetch data there. Let's go to supplier details and copy the route. So it happens. Don't think these things work 100% perfect. Control F5 again. Let's go to supplier details now. And there we go. We've got our H3 and we've got our table there. All right. Perfect. Now we can add a little bit of spice to it. If you've noticed, the fetch data, this one did not load. So there'll be times it's still loading. It has to give a very good user interface. So for you to be able to do that, you need to, there's what we call a progress. It might take it a progress. And here it is. So it loads. If it's indeterminate, it means you don't know when it will end. There are some you know that they have to end after some time. So as you can see, there's size there as well. So you can change it to the size that you want. You can even put linear ones. Okay. So in our case, well, what we want to do here is to say, let's go to supplier details, and we're going to bring an if statement here. So remember, this is HTML component. This is the HTML part. So if you want to use any C# here, you have to start with the @ symbol. So I'm going to say @if suppliers, this supplier, the list has a function called count. So if suppliers dot count is less than or equal to 0, it means not there yet. Then we want you to be loading. Else then if it has loaded, then give us this. So do that and bring that there. So if it hasn't loaded, then bring us the circular one. I want the one which is primarily the blue one there. So let's copy that, and this can come here. And I want to just change the size a little bit, like this one, which is 70. It's primary, so I can just copy this so that it should load with this guy. All right. So I'm teaching you how to use documentation here, so that when you see another feature which I haven't talked about, it'll be easy to do it, other than for me just to pick this and do them on the fly. I mean, just to do them pre-planned, then it'll be hard for you. But I want you to think of a feature, think of a table, think of a navbar, and go there and actually test it out. So now we've done this. Let's see if it is going to give us what we need. Control F5. It's building, and let's see what we're going to get. Let's go supplier details. Now at least it's loading as it's fetching the data, and once it finishes, it pops up. So brilliant. Now you might wonder, why is there action here? Okay, I'll show you the purpose for that action. Now if you go to MudBlazor, there are things that there were icons, but they're what we call float action bars. They're called fabs, and I'll show you what they do in a minute. So you're seeing, so you can see these type of icons. So we want to use these icons to initiate an add, or I mean an edit or a delete there. So what do they need? They just need to, so you need to have a mad fab. So let's copy one, the one for edit. We can copy it, and it's going to come. So if you noticed, you will see that under action, it's this one. So if I bring one here and code edit, I want to give it a primary color, which is a theme for this application. If I bring one for edit, I can also bring another one for, you guessed it, delete, right? So is there one for delete as an icon? Yes. Okay. Control F5, and boom, there we have it. You're seeing add, delete, but I feel like these are too large, and also the colors are similar. That might also bring issues. So what can we do to them? It's simple. The other one, the color, just make it secondary. That is going to distinguish. And also, if you go to the fabs, you see that they've got a size, right? So we can make them small. We can make them small here. There's size small. So I can copy that and bring it on either. So on this one, I would say size small and size small. All right. And let's see Control F5. And that's pretty. So when I click this, I want it to take me to another page. If I click delete, another page, and there I can either, so this I'll be able to edit, this I'll be able to delete. Now the next sort of business is we want to be able to also initiate adding here. Okay. Now if you look at the floating action bars themselves, you'll see that there's one for add, right? So I can copy that, the madfab add, and bring it after the table. So I could bring it here, right? That I want to add. Now let's press Ctrl F5 and see how that will impact. All right, so there we have the add, but I don't want it to be here. I want it to be somewhere here, so that it gives you that feel, the way you do with Android phones or email apps. Like you click there, then it takes you to the add button. So how do you bring in positioning using MudBlazor? In CSS we use float. So what do we use in this case? So let's look to see if we've got float. Pretty much sure we should have it. Not float, I mean flex rather. It should be something to do with the flex. Field. Might as well type it. Flex. So let's see if we have any flex. So we can flex, deflex, but what I want to flex so that I push it towards the end. So this is under flex, basic usage. Then we've got flex wrap, flex direction. Okay, so that's flexbox. Okay, so that's how you enable flex, by bringing deflex. But what I'm interested in is bringing in direction so that it starts from the end. So we've got this, then we've got this. The code says it has to be in a mud paper. So I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to come here, and this fab is going to be in a mud paper, and we can do this and bring the mud paper down here like so. You come here, so it's saying this should push that one down, and I noticed there was a little bit of like they were touching there. Might as well want to throw it a little bit down I don't know if we've got a break. If there's no break, then we're going to use the one for HTML. Let's try to bring a BR and see what it will do. All right, now Control F5. All right, now that's pretty what I wanted. So at least you do that. You add a supplier. Now, how do you get to the pages? If I click this, there's nothing. It's not doing anything. Where's intelligence? So if we go to the fab again, the fab, you notice that there's fab. Let's go not to the examples but to the documentation. You'll see that there's its behavior and click action. So there's there's an href there. There's a target. So we're going to use an href which will take us to the page we want. So if we click on the edit one, which happens to be the first one here, we want it to take us somewhere else. So we're going to bring in the href. All right, and since this is HTML, then we need to carefully also bring in C# within without breaking anything. So I'm going to open that and tell it that when you're clicked, I want you to go to supplier. Okay, so /supplier /edit and send there the ID. So context.id. So when you're clicked, take me to this end page, and as you're going there, go with the ID as well. Okay, when somebody clicks delete, I want you to do something similar, only this time around you're going to go to the page called delete. Okay, same thing for the start button. When somebody clicks you, then I want you to go to supplier /add. Now you notice I haven't used this notation here because there's nothing dynamic here changing. Here the ID will change depending on who it is, depending on who this is. If I click this, the ID will be this, so that will change. So to avoid it clashing with the C#, I have wrapped that, but for here there is no need. Okay, so let's press Control F5 and let's see if that's what really we're going to get. Okay, so if I click this, you notice it takes you to supplier.add, right? But obviously it'll tell you that doesn't exist because we don't have that layout. If I click edit, it will take me to supplier edit in that ID. Again, it will say that doesn't exist. And if we click delete, it will take us to that endpoint, but that doesn't exist, which is a good thing. It's routing. We just need to point it. Now I want to remove these other three things and just focus on this. So I'm going to go to the nav menu under shared and just do away with these things. All right, and have one. And the next order of business is when we click excuse me, when we click add here, it has to take us to the add developer. So here is the add supplier. So first thing we need to do is give it a page. All right, so how are you going to know that you're getting there? So put in an add page, and this will be supplier/add. Nice. Let's give it a page title. This will be add supplier. Of course, I'll change that and I'll tell you why. And we also have to bring it a mud text since we're following the conversion of MudBlazor. So copy that and go to add supplier and bring it over there, and this will be add supplier. It will be add supplier. Perfect. So for you to add a supplier, what do you need? First of all, you need to have a supply object which will be added. But don't forget that I also want to use the same page to also edit. So that will be interesting. So that means we need to provide the entire capability of our application to be able to handle all of these two scenarios. So first of all, we'll do something that we haven't done yet. You will notice that if you go to supplier details, we are sending it an ID here. It's coming with an ID. The reason why we're sending this ID is so when we get to that page, we'll be able to distinguish a supplier by the ID. So we need to also, when we go to add supplier, we need to capture that. So there's a concept of parameter. So have a parameter there. What this does is it tells you that there will be something that is going to come that we're going to need. So a parameter in this case will be a public, the ID itself. So let's make it a getter and setter. A getter and setter. Okay. Something else that we might need here is because is to have a title. The title might change. We might be adding on the same page. We might be editing on the same page. So let's have a title. Call it string title. By default, it will be add. Right? Also, for us to add a supplier, we need to have a supplier object. Very, very obvious, right? So protected developer. I think I'm in love with developers though. I don't think so. So we need to bring it in and call it supplier is equal to new. Right? Perfect. Now, instead of using on initial async, we're going to use something else. So let's do an override here. Override, it will be on parameter set async. And what does it do? The method is invoked when the component has received parameters from its parent. Okay, so this will be invoked if whatever is coming to this page has received parameters, and in our case it will. So we're going to use this instead of the other one. All right, so whenever we've invoked on parameter, it means I want you to search one thing, because there are two ways through which we're going to get to this page. The first way is through the edit button. The second way is through the add button. The add button sends nothing. The edit button sends you a parameter called ID. So we want to check first, as we're setting this parameter, do we have an ID or not? So if, and for you to search if a good is not empty, then you're going to say if ID is good.empty, right? If ID is good.empty, it means at this juncture we have received an ID. An ID exists. If an ID exists, then what we're doing there is we're editing. So the title automatically has to change to the word edit. Hope that makes sense. And while we're editing, we need to get that supplier. It means here we are going to make an API call to our API to get that supplier. So we're going to say supplier, this one, which is just initialized, is equal to, we need to make an API request, an HTTP request. So we need to inject the HTTP. So let's inject implements. We need to inject the HTTP client, like so. So HTTP client, which we're going to say here await HTTP client dot get from JSON, I think, and we want that to be a supplier. All right, and our endpoint is API slash supplier. Nice. So if it's not empty, then the title will be edit. Then we have the supplier. All right, but we might want to save a supplier. So we're going to have to create another function, call it task, save supplier. Okay, this save supplier could also be either adding or editing, right? Because what this does is it just gives us the supplier object, but there's nothing we want to do with it. So if we want to save it, we'll use it to save. If we want to edit, we'll edit it and then push it again. So we are going to check this again. All right, and we're going to say if it is not empty, then it means we're editing. Then it means we need to get the client and make a put request, put JSON async, right? And what does it take in? It takes in the API dot supplier / supplier rather. And for you to edit, it needs you to give it an object which you want to edit. So it will be supplier, whatever object this application will give us. Is that so? So it is. If it's not empty, then what are we doing? We are adding, right? Then it will be await HTTP client dot post as JSON async. Again, the endpoint is API / supplier, and we'll give it supplier. All right. Now the question is, once we're done saving, should we stay in the same form? No, we have to go back maybe to another page. So let's create a function that will enable us to go back to the home page. So let's call this void homepage. For you to navigate, there's something you also need. It's called the navigation manager. So you also have to inject that. So I'm going to inject, and this is not to do with MudBlazor. This is to do with Blazor. Or this client, this is to do with Blazor. Navigation manager. All right. So if you want to navigate there, you're going to say navigation manager dot navigate to. Then where do you want to go? You want to navigate to supplier details, and to avoid copy and paste issues, I'm going to go to supplier details and copy its path. See that? So we're saying that's what will happen, but we need to have our HTML. All right, so for us to change data, then obviously we need to use a form. So let's go to the MudBlazor API and see if they have any forms. And let's take an example. And you'll see that there is a simple form validation, there's an EditForm support, right? So there's one just for form and there's one for EditForm support. Okay. In Blazor, form validation is usually done with EditForm in conjunction with the form model class that is decoded with the annotations. MudBlazor's input component supports Blazor form validation if you put them in EditForm. So we need this one if we want to edit anything. And it's very easy. Go to show code and it will show you the code itself. So let's look at the code. You've got your model, which is here, register account, which is called register account. Then you see that we're giving it model there, and that model is this here, the register account model. So it needs to have that model. And on valid submit, you're calling a function, and the function is on valid submit. I'm guessing this one. It submits, and it does the rest. So first of all, it's saying you need to have this injected. So let's go here and bring it in. Then it says, well, get the form. So I'm gonna copy everything from the EditForm. So again, MudBlazor's documentation is very straightforward, not hard to read, not hard to follow. So I'm gonna bring it here. Now I see that there's some things I might not need. Things like validation summary, I might not need those. So this mad item all the way to that item, Even this one, I might not need those. I just want to have a table. Just a table, and I don't want to overcomplicate things. All right, so there you go. It's saying, so we've got a mud item, mud grid, mud grid, mud grid. Okay, so what's our mode in this case? Our mode in this case will be supplier. So let's go put supplier there. Right, on submit, we want to call a function called save supplier. All right, so that will go there. All right, the rest look okay by me. The first field, the label is going to be name, and we don't want any helper text for now. We just want something bare minimum. And the bind value will be supplier name. Okay, the same thing also applies to that validation message. And the next one would be company, like so, and this would be supplier to company. You can copy that and put it over there as well. Okay, like so. I don't want the password helper text. Then the next one is email, and this would be supplier.email. All right, that also goes for the validation over there. The next one, I don't think we need that. 3 should be enough. All right, we seem to still be getting errors. So you see, just like that, the errors are gone. And then here we have what we call register. Okay, so let's see what MudBlazor has to give. So we brought in our form. Let's read Control 5. All right, let's try to click add, and there we are. And should we try to add? Let's try to add. The name is Chief Scientist. Yeah, work full code and power out. And for some reason it's bringing in that, but we can fix that. And if I click register, what happens? Everything is quiet, and you wonder what's going on. Never. But you see that it added that thing, but didn't get there. So it failed to navigate there. I just want to see the reason why there is password there, and I think we know there is that. So that just hides. And why didn't it add? It did not add because why didn't it navigate? It's because after this we should have told it to go to home page, right here. So that's why it failed. It stayed there. Same with applications, they do what you tell them to do. So that should fix it. And let's do it one more time. Control F5. All right, let me try to add one more guy. Test. The work at AAT. The email is test@test.com. Then I'm gonna click register, and there they are. Beautiful. And I'm gonna get the test again and try to edit them. But when I click edit, something happens. We don't go there. But if I go back and click add, we go here. Now the thing is, it's not taking us there because we haven't told it to take us there. Because all we've said here is, well, when somebody clicks add, take them there. But if somebody brings in supplier data, if somebody brings in edit, it doesn't know how to handle that. So we need to tell it to handle it explicitly. So let's go back to add supplier and also add it in the page as another route. So it'll be page, like so. You're going to close that. It's going to be supplier / edit. And now it needs to take an ID. So the ID is ID, but you have to tell it that it's a GUID. So now it will handle this route as well. Now let's press Ctrl F5. And let's take CDE, click edit. And nothing really happens. It's saying an error occurred. Let's see what that error is. Because it's supposed to bind there. Okay, so let's see what that error could be. It is saying the JSON value could not be converted to supplier portal supplier path. So there's an exception thrown. Where could that be? Just a minute. Wish it showed me where exactly that happened. Line 47. Add .blazor line 47. It's this one. It's saying, so get from JSON, I think, and it should be supplier. I don't really get why that would throw an error, but it kind of makes sense because we want to get a single thing. So this is the one for get all. So for you to get a single, then you need to append an ID there. So I'm going to bring templating strings there, and here we need to have the ID. Okay, so it means the ID we get here on parameter, let's put it there. I Ctrl F5, and hopefully that error should be gone by now. So it happens. And Blazor has this, and since it's C#, you know, it's like you're debugging C# in the browser. It's even nice. All right, now it appears to be okay. Okay, let's go to supplier details and CDE. Let's click there, and boom, you see it's bound. If I put CDZ and click register there, then it should take me to the home page, and that should by now be done. So we have added here, we were able to edit. I just want to add something to make it look nicer. So when you get here, at least there should be register and cancel, so that you should have the ability to actually go back. So how do we bring back those two buttons? Okay, so let's play with HTML here. We've got one for register, and we've got one for what? We've got the other one for cancel. And for you to use the flex, there is what we call the MudPaper. If you remember the MudPaper, which we've used earlier. Let's look at its example. MudPaper examples, and we want to float it to use the grid. Where's our flex? Let's go to flex. So that was flex direction here. So we don't want it to be like this, but want it to be as a column. So it is saying let's use a MudPaper like that. So I'm gonna come here and bring here a MudPaper. Then I'll push this boy in. Then I'm going to to close the mud paper. Then I'm going to duplicate this boy here. Let's do it twice. One is primary, the other one can be secondary. All right, and the other one, so we don't want to use auto because we want to explicitly tell it that we want one up, one down. This has to be cancelled. This will just be what the title is. It could be add or edit. All right, now both of them cannot have submit, only one submit, but we want to have an on click, okay, which mud has on click. So on click, which one? So for you to use the other one, we're just gonna bring it on click, and on click, what you want to do there is go to the home page, right? So you can do this, and we're gonna call a function there. Just refer it to home page, like so. So one cancels, one takes us to the home page. Also, we want to have some alerts. I mean, we're used to, when we create, the system gives us feedback. It gives us an update to say that we've created. So how can we do that in MudBlazor? There's something that we call a snack bar. Okay. All a snack bar does is it just gives you an alert. You know, for instance, something like this. So you have to inject it. So I'm going to inject that here. And whenever I have, so I've coded a snack bar. So, and whenever I have edited there, whenever it does continue doing that, what I'm going to do there is I'm going to say I'm going to say snack bar dot add. So it gives it a message, kind of similar to the ones who use Toast in Android. It's going to be updated supplier, and it must be severity success. All right, so that is going to give us a toast message, sort of, and this will be added supply. Okay, let's press Ctrl F5. All right, this is beautiful. It's looking fine by me. So let's get to the suppliers. If I click edit, see these, I'm going to put another Z there. When I click edit, yeah, beautiful. And you will notice that there's a cancel. Let's just see if the cancel can work. And you notice that it says edit here, so it knows. If I go down here and click add, it will say add there. Beautiful. And let's add something. Triple A, and if that's triple bird at salsa.com. If I add that, it should give me an alert. Oh, that's pretty. Now let's wind up and delete and call it a day. So it means at delete, I need to expect to have a page, right? And this should be supplier/delete. But for the delete, you need to get an ID. So if you remember what we did with the edit, then here you're going to bring in curly brackets and ID there and tell us it's a what? It's a good, right? Then we can bring in the page title, and we can bring in that mud text, which we used for the heading, like so. To the supplier, that can come over there. we can leave it like that. But first things first, we need to have the functionality to make the API request and get us that. So we need to have it. We need to have a supplier object. All right. So you're gonna say protected. If you want, call it supplier, and you have to bring it in as well. Then supplier is equal to new. Close that out. We need to have, okay, let's override what should do one parameter. One parameter could also work because we have to receive that parameter. All right, and let's not forget to bring in the parameter. It's very important. So parameter, it's a public GUID ID. Let's make our getters and our setters like so. All right. So on parameter set, then we need to say supplier will be equal to. So we also need to have the HTTP client to make the call. So that's always a must if you're making this. HTTP client. So here you're going to say await HTTP client dot. So first of all we get is ID, but we need to get from JSON async. All right. We cannot delete without. So to avoid the mistake we did last time here, we are going for the actual. So API / supplier / ID. All right. There we have it. And we would have a functionality, a function to delete that things are protected. Async task remove supplier. And I'm gonna give it a GUID ID like so. And we're going to say await HTTP client dot delete async and give it the API. So it's API, the endpoint, supplier / ID. All right. And you also want to use a snack bar. So let's go to add supplier. We need that snack bar. Inject it here as well. And here we're going to say snack bar dot add, and I'm going to say deleted supplier. Then severity is going to be success. All right. And we also need to navigate. So let's inject the navigation manager as well. That's why you put them in the import so you don't repeat this. Okay, ideally. So bring in the navigation manager like so. And once you've done that, you can just say navigation manager dot navigate to and get me to supplier details. Okay, so this is going to enable you to delete, but now we need to have the HTML, right? So delete supplier. Same thing here. It'll be delete supplier. Okay. So we're going to bring in a little bit of the mud text here, but it's going to be an H4, should be so smaller, and here will be delete delete supplier dot name, right? Okay, now for this excuse me, we're not going to use a very complicated table. We're going to use a mad simple table. It won't be as complicated. It's going to be a very simple table like this one, not the default one which we used for the others. You see, all it does is it has a for each, but I'm not interested in bringing the for each loops. I'm just interested in bringing the body, not even the head, and I'll show you why. So I'm going to copy this. Let's go to delete supplier, and I'm going to bring this just somewhere here, right? Now I don't need the head to show me the content. I just want the body. It's possible, and I don't want to loop anything. Not looping in anything. That's just a very simple, very simple table. It's just for displaying purposes. All right. So tr, then I'm gonna have a td. Okay, I'm gonna have two of them, like so. Then I'm gonna copy this and do it 3 times for the name, and so like that and like that. All right. And I'm gonna make this one strong. Okay. And I'm gonna say name. Then for this one, I'm gonna bring an emphasis, and I'm going to say at supplier dot name. See that? Here I'm gonna bring in strong, make it bold. Then I'm gonna say company. Then here I'm gonna bring in emphasis. All right, so and say at supplier to company, and same here we're going to bring in some boldness, strong, and we're going to say email, and here we're going to bring in some emphasis, and we're going to say some emphasis if you can be, so supplier dot email. All right, and then the body there, my simple table, and I just want to bring in the same buttons which we had on the add supplier, and I don't think it would hurt just to get the mud paper there class and bring it underneath the just break it, br, just break that, and let's break it again, and let's break that again and bring the mud class. All right, so all of these two are going to do something. So this one's a home page. The best way is also to copy that home page function. Comes in handy. So that might be here. And to avoid duplicating code, then we just put in homepage there because it's doing the same thing. Okay, some clean code. So this one does that. So there's no form, so the submit there won't make any sense. We just have to put in the on clicks here, and this would be remove supplier, right? Remove supplier, and it gets in the supplier .id, right? And this is straight out delete, and there you go. There you go. Let's press Ctrl F5. All right, CDs, let's click delete, and there we have that. Delete CDCs. If I click delete, and that's gone. And I can delete another one, code empowered myself, you know, and I could cancel. So we're gonna have to stop here. We've done our CLAD, and I hope that you've learned a few things about MudBlazor, how you can, try it out and use it. And if you find this content helpful, subscribe, do share, and if you have the capacity, you might as well get me some coffee. So thank you very much. I'll see you next time.